I'm sitting there with a Rubik's Cube, trying to figure out how to twist the dials to get to 50, to replace this with something better.
Senate impasse on health care. Congress goes home without reaching consensus. We'll hear from Congressman Ted Deutsch.
The American public could have legitimate concerns about their safety when we open our doors.
Travel ban 2.0. The president's order is underway, targeting 6 countries and countless travelers.
It does worry me about the country.
The president goes low and gets personal with insulting tweets attacking the co-hosts of Morning Joe. We will take that to the roundtable.
Good morning. So great to have you with us this holiday weekend. Among those taking off, the lawmakers who shelved a vote to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act.
Senate GOP leaders and the president had hoped to get approval for their version of the health care bill before they headed home for the July 4th weekend and a 10-day break. But Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could not round up the needed 52 votes, and there will have to be some major changes in the bill to get it passed. If it does get through the Senate, then it still has to go to a conference committee with the more conservative House of Representatives.
South Florida Congressman Ted Deutsch is one House member who voted against its version of the bill. He is a Democrat representing Florida's 22nd Congressional District from Fort Lauderdale to Boca Raton, roughly, and as you see, here with us today. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
And great to have you here.
Thank you.
The future of the Senate health care bill failed, obviously, to get the needed number of votes. What's going to happen here?
Well, I think we should be grateful that it failed to get the number of votes that it needed to pass. This is a terrible bill. There is a goal that we should all be striving for, and that is to make access to health care available to everyone and affordable to all. And
where does this bill fail?
And this bill fails because it fails on both counts. First of all, it strips away so many of the consumer protections that were in the Affordable Care Act, the kinds of things that required insurance companies to cover essential benefits like maternity and ER care and pediatric care. Right. It also would drive up costs, especially for people between the ages of 50 and 64. And it would gut Medicaid, which would have a dramatic impact not just on people getting access to health care through Medicaid, which would be bad enough, a dramatic cut there, but it would also have a huge impact on people in nursing homes and people pregnant women, people who are suffering from addiction, who need access to treatment. All of them would be hurt by this bill.
So many of the same concerns that were in the House bill are now in the Senate bill. And this week, actually, we saw the Congressional Budget Office report that shows that 22 million people might lose their insurance, which is slightly less than the House bill, but still a staggering number of people. So this is not only a complicated matter on many levels, but so political. So who's going to blink?
Well, it's not a question of blinking, it's a question of actually standing up for your constituents and working together to do something to make their lives better. The problem right now is that for the Republican leadership in the House and Senate, Speaker Ryan and Majority Leader McConnell, their goal is a campaign promise. They want to, and this is true for Trump, they want to repeal Obamacare. We should recognize all of the benefits in Obamacare, in the Affordable Care Act, acknowledge where there are shortfalls that a lot of us have been saying we need to address to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. Some of us have been saying it for years, and then work together. Instead, they're going down this dangerous path to repeal it. The suggestion made just before we left Washington to repeal it with nothing else there that would cost tens of millions of people access to health care and hundreds of millions of people access to consumer protections that they need.
That's what President Trump said on Friday is just go ahead, repeal it, and we'll figure out a way to replace it. But even Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, who's kind of a moderate Republican, put that out there. What's wrong with that?
Well, think about the debate that we've been having. Think about the fact that we have a bill that the last poll I saw, I think, is supported by about 15% of the American people. That's terrible. If you simply repeal the Affordable Care Act, you will lose all of the benefits that have accrued to the American people. You will put healthcare back, you put insurance companies back in charge of healthcare, and you would drive up costs, and tens of millions of Americans would lose their coverage. That's I can't understand why anyone thinks that that's a good result.
But isn't one of the biggest criticisms of Obamacare is that the insurance companies have pulled out of so many places that in some counties there is one provider?
Right. So and we need to look at the individual market, and that's an area where we have to work to provide more competition in order to bring costs down. A lot, if you look at some of the announcements that some of these insurance companies are making, they're making these announcements based on the fact that the President of the United States had said that he wants to unilaterally change this to make it harder for them to provide that coverage, to disincentivize their willingness to participate in the program. So in fact, we've got a situation where you've got a situation that we can work to strengthen, and you've got a president and leadership in Congress that is actively working to weaken it, and that I don't understand why that would be an approach that they would pursue.
Congressman, let's kind of take a larger look here, kind of a macro view. What the conservatives are trying to do, and President Trump promised during his campaign, is to, well, President Trump promised, in fact, to protect Social Security.
He promised he would not cut Medicaid.
And Medicaid. Well, but the conservative members of Congress, your colleagues, have said we need to cut back the entitlement programs. And Medicaid is about the biggest Medicaid entitlement program there is. And it's tremendously expensive. You're a former state lawmaker. Right now, Medicaid in Florida takes up roughly a third of the general budget. I mean, $27 billion goes to Medicaid. I mean, this just can't go on forever, can it?
Here's what would happen if this Senate plan were to go forward. When you see this $800 billion cut to Medicaid, which, by the way, let's be clear about this. The reason it's so important to make that cut is to then turn around and provide massive tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. But when you see that cut, here's the decision that my friends in Tallahassee will have to make. They will have to then make decisions about whether to continue to provide access to care for people in Florida and people living in nursing homes, people who need, who are women delivering babies, people who need treatment for abuse. They're going to have to decide that, or if they're going to continue to do that, then they're going to have to make massive cuts in education, massive cuts in other parts of the budget. I appreciate what you're saying, Michael, because my colleagues aren't being so clear about that. This is really just an attempt to gut Medicaid and
wealth transfer.
And it's a huge cut that they're then not interested in using to do anything else with except to transfer it through tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. If they would just be clear about that, as the way that people now understand this to be, we might actually be able to put that aside and move forward to strengthen the Affordable Care Act.
How can you even, there has been so little talk that I've heard, so forgive me if I haven't heard it, but how can you even discuss any of this without attacking the costs of medical care? And when people ask me, why are aspirins $8 each when I go to the hospital? I mean, I don't know how to answer that. Do you?
No, and I've met with I've met with doctors to talk about this issue. There are all kinds of ideas that would help bring down costs. We need greater transparency in medicine, in healthcare, so that everyone knows why the costs are the way they are, so we can bring them down. We need to give Medicare the ability to negotiate lower drug prices. That would reduce costs. Candidate Trump said that was something that he believed in. That's something we ought to do right now. But again, instead we're having the partisan debate about repealing Obamacare instead of actually strengthening health care for Americans.
On Friday, there was, as it were, a glimmer of hope. Some members of the Senate, Republicans, said, okay, we may not have to get rid of that 3.8% tax on investment income that the wealthy pay. And that would sort of ease or return billions, I don't know, $170 billion to the Treasury. And also there was talk about compromise. Let's bring the Democrats into the process. Let's bring in Bill Nelson and Susan Collins of Maine and other, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, other Democrats who may sit down with Republicans and somehow find a solution. Isn't that the way to go?
If the goal should always be to strengthen our existing laws, in this case, to ensure greater access to health care so that everyone has access, we can have more competition, and we can bring down costs. If that's the goal, if that's where we're trying to go, then by all means, we should sit down and do it. But if the starting point is we have to repeal Obamacare because that's what we promised to do, that would be devastating to the American people, and it doesn't show a willingness to sit down and compromise.
We have a lot more to talk about with Congressman Deutsch. We hope you will stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Live in our studio this morning, Congressman Ted Deutsch of the 22nd Congressional District, a Democrat. Congressman, need to get you on the record here about the tweets that President Trump sent out in anger the other day about Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough on MSNBC. Everybody at home has seen them, but let's put them up on the screen briefly so you can see them again and we get your reaction. The president said, I heard poorly rated at Morning Joe speaks badly of me, don't watch anymore. Then how come low IQ crazy Mika, along with Psycho Joe, came to Mar-a-Lago 3 nights in a row around New Year's Eve and insisted on joining me? She was bleeding badly from a facelift. I said no. When you heard that, what did you think?
I don't know how many times I've said that the president should stop tweeting, that this is beneath the office of the presidency, that it's not dignified, and that it's frankly embarrassing. That said, we shouldn't be surprised. Every time he tweets, he reminds us that those moments where we pause to think maybe now the president is going to start acting presidential, that it's only a matter of time before this happens. The problem is there are real issues that we need to be grappling with. The president is tweeting about this when there is this ongoing investigation into Russia's attempts to hijack our election. Which he calls a witch hunt. Not only does he call it a witch hunt, and I don't know about the timing of this tweet, but he called that a witch hunt despite the fact that the entire intelligence community has acknowledged it, but then started this effort to try to gather all of the voter data from voters all around the country in order to start a voter board.
You know, I feel compelled to say, just for balance here, that if the president's advisors were here with us today, they would say that I don't know if you watch Morning Joe at all. They are very critical of the president, and sometimes they get a bit personal. And I would guess that the president's advisors would say, look, the president feels like he doesn't have the press access that a president should have, and here he has his own Twitter feed, and this is how he hits back.
I think that we can agree, though, that name calling in the most playground-like way is not what we expect or should expect from the President of the United States. The President is off to Europe. He's going to be meeting with Vladimir Putin. Held to a
higher standard is what you're saying. The President is held to a higher standard.
Of course we should hold our President to a higher standard. Everyone should hold our President. That is hardly a partisan view. If we can't expect that our President is going to behave in a way that upholds the integrity of the office and the way that those around the world, we want those around the world to view the office, that's really challenging for the rest of us who are trying to advance America's interests.
You're on Twitter.
I am on Twitter.
When you tweet, what do you do before you hit send? Do you read 20 times and consider what you're saying and how it's going to be perceived?
Of course I do. Look, I do spend a lot of time. I often decide not to tweet things, not because they were too mean, but because they weren't clever enough, frankly.
Delete.
Right, but of course, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're tweeting or whether you're speaking into a microphone or sitting on a panel with the two of you this morning. You have an obligation to think through what you're going to say, to not just blurt out things that might embarrass you, or in this case, the office of the president.
All right. Let's move on to a really serious subject. I know you believe it is serious, and that is this commission that President Trump has established to look into alleged vote fraud in the last November presidential election. He has said that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally, generally voted for Hillary Clinton, and he has appointed the commission, and one of the vice chairs is Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas, a very conservative guy. And you say this is a sham commission. Why is it a sham commission?
Well, first of all, it's a sham commission because there is no evidence, zero, absolutely no evidence, that 3 to 5 million people, illegal immigrants, voted for Hillary Clinton. The president has made this point repeatedly. It has been refuted repeatedly by all of the experts.
By bipartisan secretaries of state and election supervisors.
That's absolutely right. And so the fact that this is an effort being led by the Secretary of State of Kansas, the person who is responsible for some of the worst laws that are meant to try to make it harder for people, minorities in particular, to access the vote, shouldn't be surprising. And again, what the president ought to be doing, instead of talking about these fake voter fraud claims that he's making, he ought to acknowledge that there should be a commission, but the commission should be looking at the ways to strengthen all of our states against potential interference by Russia in the 2018 election, not this sham to go forward. But again, let's remember, in 2012, our governor led an effort to try to conduct a voter purge here that I helped to try to stop, and that was an effort that I think is being mirrored here. It's little wonder. I don't know if Governor Scott and the president talked about it, but the federal court stepped in that case, said that it violated federal law.
And this just bubbled up into the public consciousness because of the federal request for all the states to turn over so much of the voters' personal identifying information. That's why we're talking about this.
That's right.
This week.
Right. And thanks for clarifying, because this is an effort to gather, this is an effort for this group of Washington insiders, White House insiders, to gather a list of every voter, their party, their history of military service, personal information.
Social Security numbers.
Social Security numbers, or at least the last four, but information that nobody would want to be out and available in the general public, certainly not on a national basis. That's the reason that there are so many secretaries of state around the country who have said, no, we're not going to provide that. Absolutely not. Especially
at this time of rampant voter theft, ID theft, or ID theft as a whole.
It's not hard. It's not hard to imagine the worst case, which is the White House collects this data, and somehow, either through a hack or disclosure or some other way, all of this information about hundreds of millions of Americans is available online for anyone. That would be a devastating violation of people's individual privacy rights.
Privacy rights, exactly. Ted Deutsch, great to have you come in. Happy 4th of July. You will be marching with a band from your district in Washington?
Yes, the Spanish River High School band was invited to come up to Washington, and I'm going to march with them in the parade up in D.C. It's my first marching band parade since I played the trombone in 9th grade.
Well, maybe they'll give you a trombone and you can blast away.
It would only embarrass them. I'm not going to do
Don't
that.
play the Washington Post March. I don't think it's very popular around the White House.
All right, stay with us. Up next, we take it all to the round table. Stay tuned. On the plate for the roundtable today, the president's crackdown on travel and controversy on Twitter.
And also, of course, this health care bill and where that may be headed now. But first, let's get to the introductions. H.T. Smith, widely respected Miami attorney, civil rights leader, law professor at Florida International University.
Saman Movasagi Gonzalez is founder and managing attorney at the Florida Immigration Law Council.
And Angela Vasquez, president of the Women's Republican Club of Miami. Angela, we're glad to welcome you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks on this holiday weekend.
Thank you.
Saman, this travel ban, you are the immigration expert.
Thank you.
What?
Sometimes.
Thank you. All right, so what does it say? The Supreme Court voted 9-0.
Right.
You can go ahead on a limited basis. What is the limited basis?
Well, it's really a very watered down version of the formal travel ban that went out in March. And basically what it states is that anybody who doesn't already have a visa on June 26, 2017, now from any of the 6 countries, Muslim majority countries, they have to go through another set of vetting in order basically to try to get a visa to come to the U.S. So they have to be able to show that they have a close bona fide relationship with a parent,
That's the
sibling,
key phrase,
spouse,
bona fide
relationship. Exactly. Grandparents aren't included, aunts and uncles aren't included, cousins or extended family members. And then the other part of that is that if they have a close business relationship with a business entity, they'll have to be able to prove these in order to get the visa status that they need. And if they can't prove this, then they'll have to go through a waiver process. And with the waiver, they have to be able to prove that they themselves are not a threat to national security, that their restriction will have undue harm to them if they're not allowed to come to the United States, and that they have a purpose for coming to the United States.
Right.
So basically it's another added layer. And then there's he also put the pause, the Supreme Court put the pause on the refugee program for 120 days. And the travel ban is going to put on pause for 90 days. So it will all be revisited again in October, but this is where we stand as of now. And I think the really main concern here is how all of this is going to be implemented at the airports, because at the airports and at the embassies, that's where the real focus comes out.
What a difference the airports, though. Angie has, this time there were no protests, and when was it, a couple of months ago, the first travel ban, it was bedlam at the airports, not only with people coming in, but people who come out to protest. This time, not so much.
Well, I think it's maybe not as new news, and maybe the idea that it's 6 countries, it's 90 days, 120 days. I think it's been overdone in the news a lot, and it's not as bad as it sounds. There are 50 Muslim countries, only 6 are included. And to your point about the Supreme Court, I think something that people overlook is there's a separation between foreign policy and domestic policy, and I think if the Supreme Court starts telling the president what they're allowed to do and not to do, you're skating on very thin ice, because it could have other implications as well.
Well, the president supremely has the right to make foreign policy. HT, I would point out, maybe you're about to, that never one of the 6 countries that now have this special scrutiny, nobody from one of those 6 countries has been accused or has committed an act of terrorism against this country.
And while we want our president to have significant authority over who comes in and out in terms of immigration, it should not be, however, discriminatory. And that's what the big concern was. And we're talking about doing this for the purpose of stopping terrorism. Well, what about Saudi Arabia, where 15 of the 17 hijackers came from?
From
I think
9/11.
from 9/11.
Yeah.
There's going to be a tremendous amount of litigation, even though this is a 90 and 120 day relook at this, because these questions about bona fide educational, I'm in an education institution, and bona fide business relationships are going to be tested in the courts.
So, man, you know what I'm really stuck on is the stated purpose of this is the national security.
Right.
But in practice, why does grandma get cut out?
You know, quite
How
frankly,
does
so
that-
this decision came out last week. So everybody's been scrambling to find out exactly how is all of this going to be implemented, what's been going on with it. And I've been reading so much, and reading the Department of State came out with a cable, the FAQs on the Homeland Security's website and whatnot. It's really interesting to see exactly who's being targeted here. You have people who are winning diversity visa lotteries who are going to be targeted here. People who invest in the EB-5, 500,000, 1 million people are going to be targeted here. If they don't have a family relationship here and they go to apply for a visa in the embassy and they can't prove that bona fide relationship, they're going to have to apply for a waiver. And they've already invested $1 million in a business here in the U.S.
And
it's not really, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's not really serving the purpose when you see this dramatic title of preventing foreign nationals nationals are committing terrorist acts in the United States. Okay, nobody disagrees that this is in the best interest of the United States, that title. Nobody disagrees with that. But that is something that needs to be handled in the foreign policy level. That's something that needs to be handled when in our relationship with Europe or in the Middle East, not just singling out 6 countries and saying, okay, you can't come here because you're a national from Iran, or you can't come here because you're from Sudan. How many doctors do we have here from those countries?
Well, direct to your question, I didn't know we had a big problem with abuelas and grandmamas being terrorists. How in the world are we leaving grandmothers out?
It's not terrorists. It means they can't claim their children. I mean, the bona fide part, you have to have a close relationship. And that was the Supreme Court. The president did not ask, don't let your grandmother claim you. That's the Supreme Court. I would assume that to get that unanimous vote, there were probably concessions. And I don't know why grandma.
I have the answer to that. There's the Immigration Nationality Act.
Right, which classifies what's called an immediate relative.
Right.
Oh,
okay, so an immediate relative is you being able to apply for your spouse. Children who are over 21 can apply for your parent. These are immediate relatives, siblings. These are the family-based preference categories that are already set by the Immigration Nationality Act.
So that's 50 years old. That's not something that the president nor the
Exactly.
Supreme Court.
So they took it as that standard to to utilize it for a close relationship.
Angela, the president has said repeatedly over the last couple of months that what he is looking for is national security, not for a Muslim ban. But the lower courts, both at the trial court level and the appellate level, have looked at what he said during the campaign and have said he is attempting an act of discrimination based on religion.
And if we took everything a candidate said during a campaign and held their feet to the fire, whether Democrats or Republicans,
well, they say a lot of stuff.
But there are 50.
So do that.
There are 50 countries. He picked the 6 countries that actually the previous administration had pointed out because of the vetting process, because of how those countries are right now. It's difficult to vet. If he was anti-Muslim, we'd just say all 50 countries, nobody can come in. And that's not what happened. It's 6. And yeah, he might have said, the word Muslim because the same way that, abuelitas didn't place to bomb. I don't know the last time that, a Jewish student bombed somebody or a Cuban American,
actually
refugee.
very recently.
Well, actually,
not here, but very
okay.
recently.
Yes, actually, that was a bad one.
No problem.
But the point is,
but point taken.
We understand the point.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's, if we can, look at least briefly at this health care bill. And HT, it certainly appears even to Senator Mitch McConnell that the only way to solve this impasse is for Democrats and Republicans to sit down together and try to find enough Democrats to come and sit down and negotiate something that they can accept.
Yeah, obviously the political leaders know that that's the best way to do it. The problem is that the key points for the Republicans are the non-starters for the Democrats, and the key points for the Democrats are the non-starters for the Republicans. The Republicans are concerned about the high cost of the premiums and the deductibles. The Democrats are concerned about providing access to health insurance and not having 22 million people lose their health insurance. Higher live. That's one of the highest concentrations of Obamacare. Right. They love Obama. They love the care, but they hate Obama.
You know what? There's a lot of talk about that we need to do about this healthcare issue. So what do you say? We take a break really quickly and come back. Pick it up from here. Sure. Okay. Welcome back to the Roundtable. H.T. Smith, Saman Movasagi Gonzalez, Angela Vasquez. We are in the middle of a point you were making about health care. Doesn't matter what you call it, don't take away my health care. I think that's where you're going.
And we have a situation here where I think, and I can't wait to hear from Angela, that the Republicans have painted themselves in a no-win situation, because if this horrible bill passes, either the Senate bill or you're going to have people who can fact-check because they've lost their health care, their grandparents have lost their health care, their children cannot, who have disabilities. I mean, they can fact check it. You can't say it's fake news because I've lost it. And if they don't, then they have not kept the promise with their base. So they lose both ways.
Angela Vasquez, you run, 5 senior centers,
yes.
Southwest Miami-Dade. A lot of these people clearly are Medicaid recipients,
yes.
their bills are being paid for by Medicaid. 4.1 million people in the state of Florida are protected or served by Medicaid. And for all its shortcomings, it's really a good program, and it works. What's going to happen to those people if this bill should pass?
Well, first of all, they slowed down the rate of Medicaid. They're not cutting Medicaid. And well, my seniors are mostly low income, and they're up over the age, many of them are over the age of 80, so they wouldn't be affected. But during the Obama presidency, they went up to not just the poverty line, but 138% over that. So you do have a lot more people who have it. It's a very expensive program for the states, and I would say that one of the major problems is Medicaid, because you do have states that took the money.
Yeah, Florida did not,
and we did not. But so now you have states like, let's say, Ohio, West Virginia, Arizona, that what's going to happen to, and they're Republicans, and I think that's part of the argument too. What are you going to do with those people? What are you going to do with programs when the money stops growing? Because it's not really a cut. They're cutting the rate of the increase.
But isn't essentially that the question, no matter which way it goes?
But when you talk about our government, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we can't spend a tremendous overspend on life and the pursuit of happiness, health. We want to spend money on bombs. We want to spend money on a lot of other things that benefit the rich and the wealthy. We're talking about taking care of the vulnerable, their lives, not going to movies, not going to a show. We're talking about life. And so for a third of our budget, I think that's absolutely correct to have about a third of our budget deal with life and protecting the quality of life in terms of health care.
But
Angela?
It's failing. It's failing. The exchanges are failing. There's people who, part of those 22 million people are people who are just not going to buy it anymore. People who have chosen to pay the fine because they can't afford it. People who have insurance cards and they don't use them because they can't afford it. There's counties. This is a rush to who's going to, I think it's political. If there are Republicans who believe, there are Republicans who believe let it die and it'll be all on the Democrats. And then there's Democrats that are just not coming to the table. I mean, Schumer just says, I won't do it because you said you might want to repeal it. You have to start somewhere. If you maybe put SAS with machine, Democrat or Republican, I bet you they're kind of moderate, that you might come up with something, but they're failing. There's going to be people in trouble even if they don't repeal.
But this is the moment where a compromise is critical, it's essential, and there've got to be people like Susan Collins of Maine and Ben Sasse of Nebraska. I mean, Republicans, Democrats who are just going to say, we have to put aside these mantras, these slogans, and come together. I mean, Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal this weekend wrote a great column where she said this is a moment where compromise is called for. I mean, we just have to have it.
Go ahead. Oh, I thought you had something to say. What I was going to say is, yes, there are some problems with Obamacare, but we have 20-some million people who now have insurance that didn't before. There's some shortcomings we should fix. We know the answer is not. Well, it's not working the way we want it to, so let's take it from everybody so nobody will have insurance. Well, that is not the right way to do it.
You don't know what the new one is, and I will take the blame for this. You would think after 7 years of whining about how bad Obamacare is,
you taking the blame for that personally?
Not personally, but they should have something. When you say they're going to lose insurance, you don't know that because you don't know what the new plan is going to be. It's more rhetoric. Fake news or not fake news, more rhetoric to scare people. The congressman that was here before, I mean, everything that came out of his mouth was about how bad this is going to be and that's going to be, and it's all washed. Well, it has to be fixed, and it has to be compromised.
You say, I don't know what it's going to be. The Congressional Budget Office says 22 million people will lose insurance if the Senate plan is in. The person in charge was appointed by the Republicans. You don't trust your own party people?
No,
I'm sure you do.
No, not always. And the CBO has been wrong before, including with Obamacare, what was going to happen with that.
And they've been right before, including with Obamacare and some other things as well.
All right, if we can, I want to get to another subject that we spoke about here with Congressman Deutsch and Saman. That is these tweets the president sent out this week about Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough.
Right.
You just would hope that the president, any president, would have the power to disregard slights and things that are said that may truly be offensive because he, or one day she, will have better things to do. Let's see, Kim Jong-un and healthcare, and the Iran nuclear threat, or, I mean, there's no lack of things for a president to do
other than tweeting in the middle of the night
about Mika
early in the morning.
Early morning.
You know, the way that I look at it is this is not surprising. I mean, he's been doing this the entire campaign, and he did it before. It is who he is, and the American people elected him. This is the window to who the American people wanted. They wanted somebody who was going to fight back.
It's characteristic of who he is. He is a fighter. But he doesn't take slights, and to an extent, that's a fine thing. But Angela, I mean, this language that he used, this personal attack on Mika Brzezinski, is misogynistic. It's insulting. She was bleeding from her facelift. We saw photos of her.
Why is that misogynist? You think men do not get faceless? Because as a woman,
what's that got to do with his? Look, let's focus on his tweet.
I think it's a totality, though, because he went after the other attorney who was breastfeeding while he was in a depot before. He's called women names before vulgarity.
I believe you can fact check that 1 out of 4 of his tweets does get personal, but that's all you see on the news too. You don't hear what he does or does not sign. You barely heard about what happened in the Supreme Court and the Lutheran case and all the other cases.
But isn't he distracting? I mean, his own actions take the attention away from important work that his administration is doing.
I personally don't mind the tweeting. I sometimes get scared in the mornings.
You know what?
Because I'd rather he not do that. But the hatred and they've attacked his wife, his 10-year-old son, on Broadway.
I'm going to call,
I'm going
to call timeout, because can you all stay one more round?
Sure. Stick
Let's
around.
do that. And take a quick break and come back.
We are so glad you are with us this morning for a final round here of the round table. And Saman, you were about to button up your point.
Just to make a point that I think what's even more concerning here, other than the tweets, is the Republican Party that is standing behind him. I think that they should be able to really disengage from these comments that he's making and continue on to the political agenda, but everybody gets so wrapped up with him and they stand behind him, what he's saying.
I've seen otherwise this time.
This week, I mean, Paul Ryan, I saw Republicans as well as Democrats say that's totally inappropriate. He shouldn't do it. So I would respectfully disagree. If we can, I want to move on to a topic we really tried to bring up last week and didn't have time for, and that is the future of Stephen Battelle as the chairman of the Florida Democratic Party. H.T. Smith, you're quite aware, at a big gala a couple of weeks ago in Hollywood at the Diplomat, Vice President Biden was the speaker. It was his 40th wedding anniversary. Steve Battelle tried to get him on quickly because it was, and here is a picture of Steve, because it was their 40th wedding anniversary, and neglected to introduce all the state lawmakers. And when one of them complained to him later, and they were justifiably angry about it, let me put up for you at home what Mr. Battelle is reported to have said, if we can put that up on the screen. He said, Steve Battelle said, they're like children, these black lawmakers, they just don't get it. I raised more money in this amount of time than they ever could. That's what Senator Oscar Brannon of Miami Gardens quoted Senator Lauren Book as saying. Lauren Book's a white woman from Plantation, and it was she who brought this up to Steve Battelle. When you heard about this, what did you think?
Well, first of all, there's no constituency in the Democratic Party more loyal to the party than African Americans. And when I heard that, I was offended, but I was hopeful that Battelle, would meet with the leaders of the Democratic Party who are African American.
And he did the next day.
One, to admit that he was wrong.
And Oscar Brannon.
2, apologize. 3, tell him that he will never do it again. And they then take some affirmative steps to show that African American leadership are included in the leadership team of the Democratic Party. He's done 3 of those. He has not demonstrated that he still is not cutting the black leadership out of the important decision making, and that's critical. And if he doesn't do that, we'll be talking about the former head of the Democratic Party.
Right. Yeah, I don't see how, well, Angela, let me sort of get your reaction to this when you heard about this, read about this. I mean, these comments are just totally inappropriate, offensive, and, you know, Mr. Patel, who I happen to know a little bit, I know he felt badly about it. We've invited him to be on this program. He has not agreed to come. But, I mean, you just can't have the head of any political party talking about your black lawmakers as being childish.
I think he should resign, personally. I was shocked, and I agree. You know, the black African Americans, by and large, are Democrats, and you have something like that happen at a big event that was highlighted event. I think there's no excuse for that, and he should step down. We had, unfortunately, something bad happen on our side recently,
Yeah,
Right.
Senator Frank Hartillis.
and he stepped down. There's no place for that. And if it comes out, I don't know, my grandmother, if it comes out like that, it's in there somewhere, and it's got to go. It's not acceptable.
Yeah.
To me, it's not acceptable.
Saman, you want to weigh in on this?
I mean, I would agree as well. I don't think that that type of name calling is acceptable either. I would agree with probably the only thing that maybe we would agree on. But yes, I would agree with you on that. I just think that, like she said, if it just comes out and blurts out to you, you need to have some either restraint or some counseling or something to deal with these remarks that is coming out like that.
Character is who you are when nobody's looking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well said.
I agree.
Yeah, that's Jeffersonian, I
Yes,
believe
it
he
is.
said that. Yes,
Yes, he did.
Michael's the king of quotes.
All right.
He can name that
Well,
quote.
I'm going to, today it is HT who wears the crown. HT, thanks for coming in.
Thank
Saman,
you.
always great to have
Thank you so much.
Angela,
Thanks,
we're glad you were here. We want you to come back.
Thank you.
Love to.
Appreciate it.
All right, still to come, finally, something every American can agree upon this weekend.